Welcome to Paradise, everyone. Here we are with the crew that is doing restoration work up here in the subalpine. This is our first day of class for Introduction to Restoration Ecology at University of Washington, Tacoma, and really happy to be here on Native American Day with special guest Eric Day and the crew, and we'll just go around and introduce ourselves. How about I'll just start with you.
My name is Will. I'm a biotech here, and I'm originally from Georgia.
My name is Patrick. I'm also a biotech here at Mount Rainier, and this is my third year, and I'm from Colorado.
Thank you.
My name's Allison. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. This is my third year working on the re-veg crew, also as a biotech. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zach. I'm also from the Pacific Northwest. Kind of grew up in the Puget Sound region. That's what I tell people, at least. And this is a year 7 being on the Re-Veg crew. It's good times when it's sunny. It's good times when it's not sunny, too.
Hi,
Thank
I'm
you.
Kim. I'm the supervisor of the restoration program here, and this is year 15 for me, which is pretty insane and crazy to say, but I started working here and I love it, and I've just kept coming back. So
Thank you.
My name's Eric Day. Stoltz is my Indian name. The Swinomish tribe. There is a reason why they're up there and I'm down here. They're the crew. I'm here to share a song. But anyways, the song I'm going to share, it's a prayer song, and I just want to offer up prayers to our friends here for doing what they do. The work that they're doing is very important. So, my hands go up to each and every one of you for doing what you do, and the sacrifices that you make, coming up here, having to, especially with this COVID nowadays, all things have changed because of the COVID. Everybody's life's impacted. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, pink, purple, or blue. Everybody's affected by it, and we've all had to make some major changes in our lives. And a lot of it is isolation. So, like I said, my hands go up to you for the work that you do, coming up here, restoring the lands up here, protecting this beautiful mountain that's behind us, I believe. Somewhere over this way. Yes, it's over this way. Yes, it's over this way. Okay. This beautiful mountain. I just wanted to also acknowledge the first peoples of this land, which would be the Puyallups, the Nisquallys, the Cowlitz is also another one that they're a mountain people. They're not from this area, but they're in the mountains anyways. And the Muckleshoots as well. I just want to acknowledge them, and put in a plug for wanted to rename Mount Rainier to Mount Tahoma, because that was the original name that was given by the people of this land. And this song is a prayer song, so I offer up prayers to anybody out there that needs it today. And also, if you have any prayers for your family, friends, whatever it might be, while I'm singing the song, just in your own way, pray in your own way, and we'll see.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great way to start our class, and we can learn a lot up here from the crew, and we'll get to see some of the work they're doing. And Kim will introduce us to the site and the work that's happening here and why. And I'll take you later on up to a site we planted in 2017, and you'll see all these beautiful, slow-growing plants starting to live their lives and get a lot bigger. So thank you all. We'll just come on down here. And you can speak wherever you'd like to. Kim, where's a good spot? You want to have a little less sun on you, or?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Might be good.
you find a spot where you're comfortable, and then I'll
Maybe
get
just
it set
somewhere
up.
around here, and the planting site's behind me.
Okay, very
That-
good.
That works.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I think this is. Yeah, I like it.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Again, my name's Kim, and you'll see behind me here we have our restoration site that we're working on currently. So, our restoration sites vary from year to year, and the reason we're restoring a certain spot varies from year to year too. This spot is a spot that this area was torn up when they were redoing some water lines associated with the restroom nearby. But sometimes we're doing restoration because of social impacts. Maybe it's an area that people tend to walk off trail because they see something cool they want to go see just on, just over the next ridge, and then, it only takes one person to go look at what that might be, and then another person follows and another person follows, and pretty soon you have an area that's been impacted, and maybe there's not very many plants growing there anymore, and eventually that leads to a big bare ground impact. So some of our restoration sites are for social impacts. We've had a couple big restoration sites in the last few years that were because of construction projects. That's pretty common for us too. Sometimes when we do a construction project here at the park, the area that they do the construction, they need some space to store equipment and gear and things like that. So parts of the meadow will be destroyed for that purpose, or not for that purpose, but as a byproduct of those projects. So that's when we come in. Whatever the reason for the impact, our crew, we call ourselves Re-Veg. We're the restoration crew, so restoration ecology. And for us here at Mount Rainier, restoration kind of has two main branches. There's this part, the actually planting plants in the field sort of restoration, and then earlier in the summer, the what we also consider restoration work is invasive plant removal. So the whole first half of our season every year, so May through roughly the end of August, is focused on invasive plant removal, and we consider that under the same category of restoration as well. There's a lot of non-native plant species that can integrate into the native plant community without causing huge disruptions to the plant community, but then there's a large number of plant species that do cause major disruptions. Some of those plant species that we treat here that are of particular concern are knotweed, knapweed, a couple thistle species, Canada thistle and bowl thistle, flat pea, oxeye daisy. So there's Scotch broom. A lot of these are weeds that you all would recognize when you're out and about in other places. They're not just here at Mount Rainier. But in total, we have about 150 species that are non-native, and then of those 150 species, there's roughly 30 or 40 species that we regularly treat. And when I say treat, we use, if it's a plant that responds to manual control, so digging or pulling or cutting, then we will do manual control. But a lot of species, especially these invasive species that really harm our ecosystems, have also extensive underground root systems, which make them very successful, and they also make them really, really hard to kill by digging or cutting. So for those plants, we use herbicide. And we use herbicide very cautiously here. We're in a national park and we don't want to hurt the native plant community. That's why we're removing the non-native plants to begin with. So we choose herbicides that are we can use at a really low concentration, and we only spot treat. So we're pretty specific about what we're spraying and where. So that's a huge portion of our season every year, the beginning portion of our season. And then in the fall every year we switch over and do the restoration like what we see here behind me. So actually planting plants in the ground in a spot that's been damaged. So kind of rewind a little bit and give you a little bit of background on how a project like this comes about. So I already touched on that the initial impact can be for a variety of reasons. It can be for construction projects, it can be from social impacts from people. So because we're the Park Service, funding happens many years in advance. So we request funding in advance, usually 5 years or so in advance. And then as the date comes closer, we evaluate which restoration sites are the top of our priority list. So it's usually 1 or 2 seasons before that we have our final decision on what we're going to be planting the following year. So in preparation for that, we go out and we take a look at sites. And just because there's a site that has bare ground impacts doesn't mean that we are going to attempt to restore it. Some spots, if we look at them, we might say this spot needs restoration, but it's going to have continuous impacts. So any restoration we do will not be successful. If we feel that that's the case, we won't move forward with a restoration project. We only want to do the restoration project if we feel like it has a good chance of success. Because we have a lot of restoration projects that need to be done, and we have to pick and choose. So choosing ones that we expect success with is in the best interest of everybody. So we look at our site options, we try to pick one that we think is going to be successful, and then we move forward with planning. So one of the things that has to happen previous to the project starting is seed collection. So all of these plants that are being planted, these seeds were collected from this area here in the Paradise area. We have the park divided into numerous I don't know what quadrants, I guess I would say, of what we consider to be. We try not to have move genetic material ourselves. So if we are doing a restoration project at Paradise, those seeds are collected from the Paradise area. If we were doing a restoration project at Sunrise on the opposite side of the park, even though the exact same plant species might grow in both locations, we would not use the seed from one location and plant those plants in the other location. And you might be thinking, well, increasing genetic diversity is a good thing, and it is. It does add robustness to a species, but we don't want to be the people who are introducing that. So we try our best to maintain what would naturally be happening. And naturally, a plant from Sunrise wouldn't be over here at Paradise. It would stay over there, and it would drop its seeds over there. So a year previous to a project, those seeds are collected. So these plants that are being planted right now, these seeds were collected last fall up in the Paradise area. We have a greenhouse here at Mount Rainier, and it's down in Ashford, so it's down in a lower elevation area. And that greenhouse is operated year-round by our horticulturalist, Josh Strown. So he goes out the prior season and collects a whole bunch of seeds, and then trying to mimic what these seeds and plants would be going through in their natural environment, he refrigerates those seeds over the winter. So, here, where we're standing right now, this is a spot that has 10 to 15 feet of snow in the winter for 9 months or so. Right now it's almost October at the end of this week, and there's been years that we've had snow on the ground in middle of September. And this year was a particularly late melt year, and we actually didn't have Paradise melt out until close to the end of July. So these plants, that is what they are. That is what they're used to. That is what they are evolved for, is that snow cover. So when Josh collects the seeds, he refrigerates them over the winter, and in the springtime, he stratifies the seeds and puts them in soil and starts the process of growing them in the greenhouse. So gives the plants roughly 5 or 6 months of growth, but of course they're in like this very cozy, comfy greenhouse environment. So they're given, we do like very lightly fertilize some species. They're given all the water they could ever want. They have, pretty ideal growing conditions. These plants, some of these plants do have very specific requirements, which is something that Josh has kind of trialed and errored over the years, because there's not a lot of information in literature immediately available on how to grow some of these native plant species. So some of them take a little bit of special care. And Josh grows them, and then we bring them up to the work site. So at this point, right now when we're planting, from seed collection, refrigerating them over the winter, starting them in the spring, it's been roughly a year since this process started for these plants that we're planting now. So there is a lot of pre-planning that goes into a project like this, especially with native plants. So when it comes time for us to do our jobs, we go collect the plants from the greenhouse. We bring them up here. This is a small year for us plant number wise. This year we're doing roughly 10,000 plants. Last year we did 72,000 plants, which sounds like a huge number and is a huge number. We had a lot of volunteer help last year, which makes all the difference to have help with a project like this. This year we have 10,000, which, feels like a much more manageable number, especially considering, we have other projects happening at the same time. But 10,000 plants, and we bring them to the site, and then I'll show you in a minute kind of our planting technique. But we do have maybe a unique planting technique as compared to how you might plant in your home garden. So a number of years ago, we did a study up at Sunrise, and we planted these nursery plants in a variety of different configurations. So we grouped them together in different numbers of plants to see which ones would do the best. So we found that the plants that did the best were plants that were very tightly clumped together, and roughly like seven or so plants per clump was what was most successful. And we think the reason that that's most successful is that like tight clumping of plants kind of forms a little like microclimate of sorts. Those plants all are able to protect each other from wind and the elements, and forms a more successful clump of plants. So, I know if you're planting in your home garden, you want to like really spread things out and give them space to grow and expand. These plants here, they take decades sometimes to grow very big at all. So they don't need space. They need protection from the elements. That's the main thing for these guys. It's pretty impressive the age of some of these plants in the meadows. We were just talking today about valerian, which is one of our perennials that we have, and it's this tall, and then with the flower on it, it's roughly a couple feet tall. You wouldn't necessarily look at it and think that that's a very old plant, but there was a study done, and they found that some of those valerian plants were 100+ years old, which is pretty incredible. Some of our other species that get really old up here are shrubby species like heather. It can be a clump of heather can be hundreds of years old. So I think one of the things that us as a crew and as a park we focus on is trying to encourage people to not walk off trail. And I think, coming from different places, parks can mean a lot of different things, and parks can be used for a lot of different things. Here at Mount Rainier, in the subalpine areas in particular, the plants are so unique here and so delicate, and walking off trail here means killing plants that are potentially hundreds of years old and don't grow back easily. So restoration projects like this, if we can help the meadow basically give the meadow like a boost and a head start. We are like starting that restoration process, helping it along. If you were to remove visitor interactions, people interactions with an area of meadow, it would eventually naturally restore itself, probably, unless there was other factors involved like erosion. But with continued impacts from people, it doesn't ever give those plants a chance to grow back. So when we do a project like this, we're giving that meadow area a head start on restoration, and trying to discourage people from keeping to walk and make an impact on that spot. So another thing that we have to plan for when we're doing restoration projects like this is the maintenance of the project through the planting and also after the planting. So we usually do most of our planting in the fall because it's rainy in the fall, a lot more so than it is in the summer. Watering is one of the biggest limiting factors when we are doing planting. So if we're planting in the middle of the summer, we'd have to be watering almost every day to keep those plants alive. It's just too dry. If we plant in the fall, we are able to let nature do a bit of that watering for us, and the cooler temperatures and things just don't dry out nearly as fast. So it helps us have a more successful planting site to hold off on planting until the fall, the cooler, rainier time. We also will continue to water and maintain sites for 1 year, sometimes 2 years post-planting, until they get a really well-established root system. Once they have the root system established, they're good at that point, but it does take a little bit of time. We also will put up posts and rope off certain areas that we've planted to also further discourage people from walking into those areas, and put up signs to educate people and let them know why we shouldn't walk on certain areas.
I think it would be interesting to hear. I'm thinking about the scale of the number of visitors in a year that's not impacted by a pandemic, but a little bit about Paradise, about a tiny bit, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about its history and how many people do come every year, and what it's like up here at 54,000 feet.
Yeah.
100, not 54,000.
Yeah.
5,400 feet.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of visitors that visit Mount Rainier. The average is about 2 million a year. And of those 2 million visitors, roughly 80% or so come here to Paradise. So this is the spot that people come to when they visit Mount Rainier. And it's not because there's not other amazing places in the park. I think it's partly just because this is where our one of our big visitor centers is. It has a name like Paradise. Of course you want to go there. It sounds amazing, and it is. So this is a popular place, which also means this place is very hard hit for overuse. But actually this year our visitation has been up with the pandemic, which we kind of all were feeling as we were working. We were like, this feels very busy. And there was a statistic recently that we heard that in the month of August we had a 40% increase in visitation. So I think people have been excited to get out and explore public lands and hike and adventure and do all those things. So we've actually had an increase. The most, I think, of course, that increase is mostly people who are from the local area. There, of course, are still people traveling from other places too, but the majority has been people from the Pacific Northwest. But yeah, we've we've had more people than usual, so it's been interesting. Yeah, but Paradise here, we have we're at 5,400 feet. We have a visitor center, which currently is minimally open, but on a normal year there's gift shop and food and a place you can go in and watch a movie, and it's pretty neat if you've never visited before, it's worth checking out. There's also a network of trails that branch out from that visitor center, and then go all up through the Paradise Meadows, and continue on up onto some climbing routes that take you to Camp Muir, to the summit of the mountain. So this area is used for a lot. It's used as, climbing route access, hiking access, visitor service, visitor center, or picnic. Where we're standing right now is the picnic area up here at Paradise. Paradise was started being developed Mount Rainier as a national park started being developed in the late 1800s. Paradise in the early 1900s actually had some things that now we find surprising as uses. Part of the meadows were a golf course. It was a short-lived experiment. They quickly realized, because it's so snowy about 9 months of the year, and because the place they chose to put the golf course was very marshy, it didn't work out very well in the long run. But there was a golf course here, and that's all totally decommissioned, and you wouldn't know it's there anymore. There was a campground up here at one point as well. That also they decided that because we're in the subalpine meadows, too much impact was happening, so that was decommissioned as well. So, and skiing. There used to be skiing up at Mount Rainier too. We do still allow skiing, but we don't have any lifts or tow ropes or anything like that, but people can backcountry ski. So use has changed in the past century, and that's kind of, one of the interesting things about a national park. What national parks are seen as and used for is something that's always evolving. So it's public land, and it's everybody's, and it's for recreation and getting out in nature. So that can mean a lot of things, a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah, and I have one other sort of question, but it seems like you do invest a lot as the park as a public lands unit has a real mission to maintain biodiversity, right? Mm-hmm. That's why you're out here with these crews. And I think what's remarkable is that we're in a picnic area, and you are so invested in restoring this subalpine meadow species here, where there was an impact. And what are some of the thoughts around that, and the ways that, as a park system, you make these kinds of decisions? Because you did talk about the grant writing process, but this place was identified in advance of, arranging for funding, and I think it's really something that is unique in land use sometimes to see this much investment.
Yeah. So for a lot of spots, and this is one of those spots. This was a spot, as I mentioned before, that was impacted because there was they dug up this area of ground associated with the restroom that's behind us, which left this big bare ground impact. So
did it look like this? More?
Yes, it did. It looked just like it looks now, but it was it was like underground work that they were doing, like
a little more like this.
The piping and things. So they were doing some improvements, underground improvements, and it left this bare ground area. So kind of like I was mentioning before, if we don't help it along with restoration, it will remain a bare ground impact. It's really hard to discourage people from staying off what looks just like dirt, and it is just dirt. Like before we start planting this is just a big area of bare ground, which to most people doesn't, you wouldn't think you shouldn't walk on that. So when we take a site on like this, we're basically just we're turning it into a restoration site. We're planting plants, and we're discouraging people from continuing to walk on that spot. You'll notice that we're planting a combination of shrubby species and like smaller herbaceous species. The larger shrubby species are spirea, and larger plants like that really help discourage people. We're kind of just forming a natural blockade to keep people off that area. So, and this was a site that we thought would be successful. It's easy for us to access. It's easy for us to get here with our tools and our plants, and is a bare ground impact that we can make a difference on in just, a couple weeks. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Did you want to say any more about the design, or do you want me to do a little filming while you're demonstrating the plants? Like, I just wonder what I might have forgotten some things you wanted to say. And
Yeah, we can do a quick planting demonstration of kind of our planting technique.
Okay.
And get a look at that. Do you guys have anything else about our process that I might have forgotten?
Yeah. I don't know. It's fun when it's sunny out.
We do plants and
Yeah, you should have seen us last week.
we do plants in all weather conditions. So when it's a day like this, we are thankful.
oh, you know what? I think I have a question. I know
Yeah.
if the students were here, they would be really interested to know what kind of programs brought you up here, and how you wound up working up here, and how you've benefited from that. I mean, just as sort of like a sidebar, maybe we could say a few words before we get into the planting.
Yeah.
Do you mind if we
No, that's fine.
put you on the spot here?
So my name's Allison again, and I was in the Masters of Environmental Studies program at Evergreen State College, and there was an internship open up at Mount Rainier, and Kim hired me, and I honestly didn't have much of a plant background, so she really gave me a chance, and I loved it, and I wanted to come back, and so I just keep coming back every summer now.
So you're up for the summer,
Yeah.
and you have a place to stay?
The park supplies housing for us to stay in, so we kind of everybody that comes here is kind of uprooting their lives for the summer, but there's a lot of benefits for doing that sort of thing. But yeah, my schooling just so happened to bring me here, and if you have an opportunity to do an internship, do the internship. It'll get you to a lot of amazing places. So.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's a really important part of our class that we get to meet so many different practitioners in so many different contexts, and how an internship or a volunteer opportunity or a summer with the Park Service, how it can really change the trajectory of your whole life. Or
100%.
anyone else like to say anything about what brought you up here? And
Yeah, sure. I'll share a little bit. Hi, I'm Zach. I've been here for like 7 years now, which is crazy to think about, because I mean, I haven't done anything in my life that's lasted that long. But yeah, I would say probably like what the tipping point that like brought me, to Mount Rainier and brought me into this field of work was just like a really cool college experience that I had. I went to Edmonds Community College, and they had this environmental field school called the Leaf School, taught by Thomas Murphy. Basically in that class, instead of sitting in a classroom, we were just outside. And we learned about ethnobotany and the relationship between people and the landscape, and learned all of these native plants, and learned the names, and learned the uses, and learned just about the relationships that existed. In the course of a year, I went from, just being in the woods and just seeing it as this like blob of green, to like having names and understanding and this like deep feeling of relationship to all of the different organisms that are out here. When you can look at a forest and be like, I know what's going on here. You know, these trees are a specific type of species, that means it's a wetter area. Or these are all younger, that means that there must have been some sort of disturbance that wiped this forest out recently. It just turned me on to this type of work. I spent a lot of time meandering around different parts of the country, like doing different kinds of work with plants and, you know, just kind of adventuring around. And it just kind of bit me like a bug. I missed home. I missed wandering around in the woods and picking berries and eating mushrooms in the fall and all of that. And so when I came back here, I saw that there was this job available through the national parks, and I was like, oh man, I wonder what that would be like, working for the National Park Service. And that was kind of the beginning of this 7-year dream. It's been awesome. So many great people, like, it's very rewarding. Yeah, I just love it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really it's great to hear how sometimes you might see an ad or an opportunity and follow it through. So I'm gonna walk over to folks working over here. It's like our little break between the content of learning to plant. We want to see and learn from who's here and why you're here. So now how about I'll start here?
Sure.
And it's really beautiful looking at the patterns and things that you're doing with your plantings. So I think here's a good spot. Yeah.
Do you want me to talk about like the technique of what we're doing?
Or how about yourself? How
Okay.
you got here?
Yeah, my name's Will. I'm from Georgia originally, and I went to school in Alabama. And my first like federal position was I just blatantly sent my resume out to a bunch of stuff on USA Jobs, and got a position down in Oregon with the Forest Service, a very low grade level, and in a very tiny little area. And first time with like I had no cell service or Wi-Fi for an entire summer, and was very disconnected. And it was just great that I had a supervisor who I'm very thankful for, that like kind of helped me and one of my coworkers, because it was our first job with plants. I didn't really have a lot of interest in plants beforehand. I wasn't anti-plant, but I just didn't know much about it. And I basically just turned that into what I'm doing now, where I just would apply to as many jobs as I could and wait to see which forests or parks offered a position. I'm really grateful because this is my first Park Service job, and it's really nice. We're in like probably one of the greatest parks in the U.S., so I'm super thankful for Kim for hiring me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And what did you mention what your education, what you studied originally?
Yeah, so I actually started as computer science, and then after I had a backpacking trip in the Olympics on the peninsula here, and when I got into like higher level computer science classes, decided it wasn't really for me and switched to environmental science.
Okay, thank you. I even have a blue jay up here following the work. Thank you. It's so nice too seeing familiar faces from the past years that we've been up here.
I'm Patrick. This is my third season here. I'm from Colorado. I was born and raised in a forest preserve in Illinois, where my dad was a park manager. And then I lived in a state park in Indiana until I was 13. So I lived in a, kind of similar protected environment like this. Nature abound, and could run and play in the woods any day, wherever I wanted to. And my friends would always want to come out to the park and spend time with me, so I felt real lucky to grow up in that kind of environment. And when I was in Colorado, I initially went to college. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and journalism was my major. And I went through college and couldn't really decide. what I wanted to do, and so I ended up leaving college and was struggling to find work. And my dad had mentioned I could get my foot in the door with the open space department in Colorado, and so I did that, and I applied, and they hired me. And that progressed to a better job with the open space department in Boulder, Colorado, and I progressed from there, and I started to really enjoy what I was doing, and it was bringing me like joy from back in my childhood, and I realized that this was the job for me. And so I went back to school, never graduated, but I got more specific classwork in this field. And I started looking for Park Service jobs because that was, that was the best of the best, in my opinion. The most respectable, the best place to work for doing this kind of work. So I decided I wanted to move to the Pacific Northwest and started applying for Park Service jobs, and I got hired here and haven't looked back. And so I'm just really glad to be here, and this is a wonderful opportunity to give back to the land and show my appreciation for the mountain.
Thank you so much. It's so nice. I'm really thankful that you all shared your experience with us, because there's so many different paths to be working in restoration, and once you practice it, it really becomes the thing you want to do. It's the thing for people that find it. And then if you're ready, I'm not sure, would you like to tell us a little bit about the methods that you're using here? And I know there are even some really fascinating studies, and they're in our textbook too, about how this planting method came about, right?
Cool.
It mentions just that, like the things that you figured out up at Sunrise, right? And
Yeah. So yeah, that is the way we plant is a specific technique we use. And that technique would not be necessarily transferable across environments. So that technique works really well for us here in the subalpine meadows at Mount Rainier. But if you're doing restoration in a desert environment, you're going to use a totally different planting method. So, I would say that it is very specific to the environment you're in. This works really well for us here, though. So we have a variety of species we're planting, and I don't know if hopefully it's visible there on the screen, but we interplant different species. We have about 15 different species, and we plant them all together. We want to make the areas we're planting a mix of those species that would naturally occur in the meadow. Some species that grow up here at Mount Rainier just don't do well at all being grown in a greenhouse. So over the years, there have been some species that were like, okay, Indian paintbrush, it's beautiful. We have a lot of it up here at Mount Rainier. We would love it if we could plant that in our restoration sites, but it does not like being grown in a greenhouse. And for some plants, like Indian paintbrush, you can kind of think logically why that might be. Indian paintbrush is a plant that has really strong networks, mycorrhizal networks with other plant species. So it has really strong associations with lupin and a variety of other species up here. So when it's being grown in a greenhouse, it's lacking those mycorrhizal associations, and we just can't replicate that like nature can. So certain species, like paintbrush, we've just decided that we're gonna, obviously, we're not able to replicate it like nature does, so it's gonna be one that needs to come in on its own. But for these species that we're using, these are species that do well being grown in a greenhouse. So we plant in clumps. Like I mentioned, that somewhere around 7 plants was kind of that magic number that we realized did really well. It can be more than 7, of course, but we also want to plant in a way that's going to be efficient space-wise. So So you'll see this is the area that I was planting a little bit ago. And so like this group here is a clump. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of 7 plants, yeah. So each clump of 7 plants, this is the size they are. We have these trays, so there's 40 plants per tray. And each of these little plants, we plant them pretty much right up next to one another. So they are these nice little tight clumps, like I was mentioning, that kind of, they protect one another and form this little microclimate, micro-community. So each clump of plants is very nice and tight and compact. And then between our clumps of 7, we don't leave much space between them either. Usually it's about a hand width. I plant a little closer than that sometimes, but it's roughly a hand width between those clumps. So, you know, it's a very compact way of planting. Other things that we really like think about and take into account when we're planting is making sure, so let's say I'll just do a quick demonstration here. So if I'm going to plant a clump, I first will loosen the soil with a Mattox, and then if I need to do any additional digging, I'll use a hand shovel. But I'll take my little plant and loosen up the roots a bit. They all turn out pretty root bound once they've been at the greenhouse and they've been so well fed for the last 6 months. So loosening up the roots encourages them to grow out into the soil around them. So we loosen the roots and then put them in the soil, and we'll put them in the soil so that the level of the soil and the level of the top of the soil of the plant is about even. We don't want to plant it above or below that. And the other thing we want to be careful not to do is leave any air spaces down by the roots. So an interesting thing can happen up here because we do have snow and ice and freezing temperatures. This thing called frost heave can happen. If there's airspace left, like down in the root zone of the plants, when it rains, the airspace will fill with water, and then as it does, when water freezes, it expands. And with each time that happens, that water expanding, freezing and expanding, will slowly push the plants out of the ground, and we'll come back to our plant site and we'll find a whole bunch of little plants laying on the top of the soil. Sometimes we also have that happen from elk or deer come and pull our plants out of the ground that way too. But frost heave is something we can try to prevent versus the elk and deer. So eliminating that airspace by the roots is really important for that. So put it in, make sure there's no airspace, and then we pack the soil in nice and tight around that plant, and we're going to put our next plant just right up next to it. It often feels way too close. Like, it feels like you're not giving enough room, but it is what works best for these guys. So, and we're pretty rough with them. They're going to have a harsh winter out here, and we throw them around a little bit. Don't baby them too much. But yeah, so we just plant them right up next to each other and create a new clump. When we've planted a few flats, we'll water them in really well. Make sure the water gets all the way down into the root zone. And then we'll continue, as I mentioned before, we'll continue to maintain them with watering for the rest of this season for sure, and potentially for a year or two after. Most sites it's just 1 year after.
And when you mention the watering, it reminds me of years past when our class came up and planted for a couple years up at Sunrise, and I think that was that a 30-year project, or it's a very extensive project, and you had to get all of this plant material out and the water out, you know, up a trail, getting it all back into, not quite backcountry, but more backcountry than, like, here you're in a picnic area and you have some infrastructure.
Yeah, transportation can be tricky. So this site, our trucks are right behind us here, so we just drive the trucks up, unload our plants and water and supplies, and that's nice and easy. For other sites, like we have another restoration site we were working on this year up at Marmot Hill, which is about a mile up the trail system from the Paradise Visitor Center. And that site, we actually used helicopters to fly some of our water up there for us. We carried the tools up ourselves, but the helicopters brought the water. And we've used helicopters in the past to fly our plants as well. So helicopters are an expensive tool, but they're a super useful tool also when we're planting in an area that we can't access with our vehicles. So that's an option available to us.
And you mentioned some of the numbers of plants that you're working with in a given season.
Yeah.
And that could be 50,000 that need to get somewhere, or 60 or 100,
it's
right?
a lot of plants. Yeah. I'd say usually, I'd say our average is around 50,000 plants per fall. The most we've ever planted in a season was a little over 100,000, and this is one of our smaller seasons. And part of that is because we have fewer. We had a shorter season than usual this year, and we have a smaller crew than usual this year too.
Yeah, and you were when we were talking over lunch, you were we talked a little bit, and some of in the interviews mentioned when you do work up here, you have housing provided, right?
Yes, you do still pay for the housing, but there's government housing available for employees to rent, which it's nice because when you're working and living in a remote place like this, it's hard to find places to rent, and so it's definitely something that gives people the ability to work here.
Yeah. And with the virus, with the pandemic, you needed to change your configurations of your crews, right?
We did, yeah. Yes, so the park tried its best to follow CDC guidelines as far as housing, which meant only one person per bathroom. So in a house that we might normally have 3 or more people, those houses, if they only had one bathroom, were just a one-person house this year. So that was a constraint on our season this year for sure.
Yeah, and I'm out here and I'm socially distancing, but this crew has decided it would be easier for them to be a bubble, and since they're working so intensively together over these months, so that's why you're seeing people not wearing masks right now. But I mean, in a lot of field sites, you would still see people wearing field masks. I've been trying to wear mine when I'm close. We're definitely using our best practices.
And we definitely, if we're like this planting site here, there's not visitors who are really here. It's a Monday, and it's not a very busy day, even though it's beautiful and sunny. But as soon as we're anywhere near where visitors are, we definitely are, putting our masks on and making sure that we're keeping ourselves and other people safe too. So, but yeah, working as kind of a little quarantine bubble has worked well for us as a crew this summer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, because it's really it's good to think about how every single situation has its own set of safety concerns and issues to solve, and I wonder if we could zoom back in on the plants and maybe share some names.
Sure.
Different folks are using different plants, and you can see what I really like years past when we're up here planting all day, or we really wind up just here for a couple hours of solid work, is that each person kind of finds their pattern and their plants, and to me it almost reminds me of someone making a quilt. It really starts to grow out, and as you move, and each person's takes on a little bit of their own character, or they're like right here there's so many more rocks, so that's even changing the planting patterns and clumps and how they're all coming together. But I can really, as I look at it, it reminds me of a natural pattern when you are in more stressed out and slow growing environments like the sagebrush steppe or up here in the subalpine, where if seeds were blowing around, you'd have something that anchors the seeds blowing, and the more plants, as Kim was saying, when they can clump together, they can protect each other from the wind, or you know, have a little bit more of a foothold with their roots.
Yeah. Yeah, and you'll notice, I mean, even amongst just the 5 of us, I'm sure each of us has a different planting technique. So, yeah, you kind of, as you do this more, you find a technique that works for you. And yeah, everybody's going to plant a little bit different, which is cool. But we do try to make it look as natural as we can, so that's always our goal.
And I'm curious about some of the plants that you are using today.
Yeah, so these here, and these are looking a little sad and dry right now, but this is fescue. And we plant a lot of juncus and carex species. They do really well on restoration sites. They're easy to grow in the greenhouse. So most of these plants out here that look grass-like are not grass, but they're carex and juncus.
So slightly more wetland species.
Yeah.
It's as wet up here as a wetland in a way,
Yeah.
when the snow's melting.
So, so a lot of those ones do great. And then some of the non-grass-like species that we have, these ones here are Veronica. They get cute little purple flowers on them. I don't see any flowers on, oh, I see one tiny one there, but Veronica. And the ones right at the bottom of your camera there are partridge foot, Leucia pectinata, that have the very divided leaves. We have...
Yeah, the divided leaves that might remind you a little bit like curly parsley or something.
And then this one here, this is a potentilla, which is in the buttercup family, and it has buttercup-like flowers when it's flowering. We also have a few different aster species in here, Antonaria. So it's, let's see, are there any other?
And here's the spirea, the shrubs you were talking about.
Yeah, the spirea.